Test, 1, 2. Well, good morning. Running a little bit late this morning. I apologize for that. I'm like my old truck. Cold weather makes it harder to crank. We're going to go with that anyway. That's right. Cranky in any weather. Glad you're here this morning. If you're joining us for the first time, if you're joining us online, you've been wondering if we were going to show up. This is our Sunday morning auditorium class for the first Sunday in December. And man, I don't know about y'all, but I feel like it was just February. And so it's kind of blown by. But we have been studying the Holy Spirit and kind of plodding our way through. And now we're hopefully we're circling the runway. We're going to put this plane down at some point. I feel like we're getting close, but I've felt like that before, and it didn't work. Last time when we left off talking about the idea that in the New Testament, Spirit is used the same way we use the term soul. And not in regard to us. When we're talked about as humans, we talk about the Bible has a word for soul, but when it's talking about God, the Spirit is the essence, the very nature of God. And so we were kind of talking about how when you go to a funeral and you're viewing the body, we believe that person is no longer there, right? That vessel is empty. And that essence, whatever you want to call it, that made them has left the building. And that's kind of what we're talking about, and it's hard to quantify. It's hard to put a name on. And when the Bible talks about the Spirit, it talks about the Spirit in that relationship with God. The Spirit is the very essence of God. It is God's being. It is part of the nature of who He is. Now, and so when it says no one knows the mind of a person like that person's spirit, and then it compares that to God, the Spirit knows God better than anybody else because the Spirit is God's essence. And so that's where we left off, and then we took that and tied it to passages like when we're told that the Spirit intercedes for us with groanings beyond words, and as we don't know what to pray for, the Spirit kind of fills in the gaps, so to speak. And so how that related to our prayer life, that as I'm praying, the very nature of God is expressing to Him what I may not be able to express. That's where we left off. And so the question that I want to start with now, though, is why is it that we don't have a problem with a spiritual being uttering groans and utterances that we can't understand to God? We don't have a problem with that supernatural aspect of the Spirit, but we have a problem getting our minds wrapped around the supernatural nature of the Spirit in other ways. Does that make sense? And I'm not just talking about churches of Christ. I'm talking about in general, people, Christians. I know I'm setting aside, there are certain groups that thrive in that so I'm setting aside the charismatic folks and talking about just Christians. Not that they're not Christians. I'm digging a hole here, and I'm sorry. But they believe about that differently than we do, and so let's just talk about folks that think like we do. Why do we have a problem? Why do we feel the need to separate those two? It's like I don't have a problem understanding that there is a spiritual being that is expressing things to God that I cannot express in ways that I cannot understand. That supernatural element doesn't faze me, yet we struggle with the idea of the Spirit being at work in the world today in a supernatural manner. Okay. Because it's more personal, that we can wrap our mind around that easier because it's basically more intimate. Me and God. Is that fair? Or am I going a different direction than you intended? Hmm. No, okay, that makes sense. So it's more a matter of experience, personal experience. I can look back and see that even when I didn't know what to pray for and I was praying, God worked through those prayers, but maybe I haven't experienced the supernatural nature of the Spirit in my life in some way. I get that, Leanne. Okay. No, thank you. Because I feel like I'm being confusing. If we say, I don't know, take healing, for example, all right? We are hesitant to pray for healing in a lot of situations. We pray that God bless the hands of the doctors. We pray that God be with the doctors and nurses. Yet we're afraid to say, God, heal this person. Because, I don't know, I can postulate on that, but that's kind of what I'm asking. We don't have a problem with that supernatural, the supernatural nature of the Spirit as far as interceding in prayer. But we have a problem over here getting our minds wrapped around any kind of supernatural workings of the Spirit in the world. Does that make sense? Am I doing any better at all, or you're still looking at me like I'm close? I'm gonna go Gene and then Renee. Mm.
We learn the truth because of people telling us the faith comes by hearing. We become stronger as Christians because we encourage each other to do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
And God works through each of us to help each of us to grow, to do more, to learn, to be better. And as we do that, we more and more see the mind of Christ. We see the Spirit of Christ at work in our lives around us. That does not mean, though, healing is like gardening. You can plant the seed, you can water the seed, but you don't make it grow. God makes it grow.
Mm-hmm.
The doctor can discover what your problem is, can cut you open and put you back together again and sew you back up, but it still takes the forces of God for you to heal.
Mm.
But a lot of the work is done by us. We're still expected to plant,
Mm-hmm.
to plant the seed, to water the seed, to take care of each other, to do the physical things.
Mm-hmm.
We do our part, but He does all the
Mm.
things.
Okay. So Gene's saying that in a lot of the ways you see God working through the Bible, you see God working through people and through individuals. That's fair, right? And so as such, we have a part to play in this. And I'm gonna paraphrase a little bit, and so correct me if I'm wrong. But the fruits of the Spirit, the fruit of the Spirit, has to be cultivated. You have to create an environment where that can grow, just like any plant. I don't magically make the plant grow, but I can create an environment that will produce a healthy plant. But once again, I can't just speak to an acorn and say, be a tree. I don't have any control over that, although I can feed and water and cultivate and weed and whatever else. Okay? Renee? Mm. I think you're absolutely right. I think you're absolutely right. And for those of you who couldn't hear, that sometimes when we're hesitant to pray, we are looking at the reality of a situation, and we are afraid to pray for healing because we're kind of preparing ourselves. Correct me if I'm not paraphrasing you, but we're kind of preparing ourselves for what at least appears to us to be inevitable. And so it might be a reflection on our faith or on our ability to speak out in faith. I think that's exactly right. Because I'll say, I know people who wouldn't hesitate to pray for God to heal Gene of a cold. You know, Gene's got sniffles today. God, please heal him. Take that away. Nobody have a problem with that. But you know, something else that's a little more serious, and I don't want to put any curses on you, Gene. But something else, we're a little bit more hesitant because, and is that a reflection on my faith? Is that a reflection on my belief? Is that, I don't know. I'm not going to make accusations because I can't see what's inside anybody, but I think Renee's onto something there. Anybody else want to jump in here before I move on? Because, Kara, I thought I saw some hands, but. Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm. Right. Yeah. Kind of hedging our bets. Kara's living in this situation right now where Todd has cancer and you're scared to pray for it. Renee, I don't want to cut you off. And that's yes. Mm. Sometimes me praying for healing is selfish because I want that person to stay with me, and rather than what might be best for them. I'm living with that right now with my mom. You know, my mom was. Long story, you don't care, but I don't mean you don't care, but I don't want a rabbit trail. But over Thanksgiving they were on a lockdown and we couldn't visit, and so I tried to call her, and she doesn't do phones well because she can't understand what's going on, and it was really hard on me, and I don't know what to pray in that situation. You know, I would love God to heal her and take that away from her and her be her again. On the other hand, if I really believe what I say I believe, it would kind of be better for her to go home and be with God. That'd be better for her. And so my selfish nature wants to say, God, heal her because I'm not ready to give her up yet. But is that best for her or is that best for me? Larry, you had your hand up.
I think where the problem We can ask him for this. I think we need to not be hesitant to ask him.
It's a good point. And as a father, I mean, those of us who have kids, you want to hear your kids ask for what they want. That doesn't mean they get everything they want. But if they don't get everything they want, does that mean I don't love them? No. Sometimes not giving them what they want is because I love them. I love them too much to give them what they want. And we get that. But then when we take it over here and apply it to God, we kind of struggle with it because I think Larry hit something on the head that we take too much responsibility for the healing or the not healing or whatever. And I think that translates over because we've seen the abuses on the far side where, you know, I'm not going to name names, but so-and-so said he was the faith healer and he had the power. And I mean, I think that dude's living in a very, very dangerous place because you're stealing glory from God at that moment. And I don't know that I would ever want to do that because that to me is very scary. But I'm not him. It's not my business. But I think we see that and kind of knee-jerk go the other direction because of we look at that and go, that's not right. I know that's not right. And so I go the other way. And you know, I don't know. Gene?
Well, and part of it, kind of a backwards way of looking at it, I think part of what we want, like in talking about your children, is you want them to talk to you.
Hmm.
You don't want them to just clam up and
Right.
block you out. You want them to talk to you, come to you with problems, and tell. You want them to tell you what they think they need, even though in your experience and wisdom and maturity, because you're older than they are, and lived longer than they have, and been through those things, you know that what you think they need is probably not what they need. You still want to hear them come to you with those needs, and that's what we have to do with God.
Absolutely.
God wants to be our Father, and we need to be His children.
Yeah, Gene says, you know, as to go back to that parenting metaphor, we want to hear from our children. Even if in our wisdom and experience we realize that what they think they want or what they think they need at this stage in their life is not the best thing for them. We don't usually try to crush their dreams like that. We just listen and try to because we do want to hear from them. Larry?
The sad thing is, we don't want to ask what we really want. The prodigal son, when he came home, he was coming home hopefully to be a servant. God had different plans. He wanted to make him a son again.
Mhm.
All the rights he ever had. When we pray, don't ask for crumbs.
Mm.
Ask for
The entree, yeah. That we don't always pray for what we really want. Like Larry's using the example of the prodigal son. When he's coming home, he thinks he's coming home just to be a servant, but the father has bigger plans than that. He wants to bring him back to full sonhood. And so sometimes we're the same way. We come back and we're asking for crumbs rather than the full thing. Chris? Ooh, that's good. That's good. Chris said he had a teacher once who said, and I'm going to paraphrase this and probably mess it up, but that he fully expected when he gets to heaven to when he opens the door to his mansion, it's going to be full of stuff, and he's going to ask God, where'd all this stuff come from? And he's like, and God's going to say, these are all the things that you always wanted, but were too afraid to ask. And that's good. Terry.
Do we truly understand just how much our Father loves us?
No. I'm sorry. I don't mean to. I'm not discounting your. Go ahead. I know that was a rhetorical question. Go ahead.
I understand, but do we truly understand just how much our Father loves us?
Do we truly understand how much our Father loves us? And I immediately said no, because I don't think even understanding as much as I love my children, I don't think I understand the level of God. But I get your point. I think, but unpack it a little bit and let me make sure that we're going in the same direction.
That may play a role in how we ask God for his blessing.
Yeah.
We don't see him loving us
Mm.
as he sees himself loving.
And so maybe our prayer life, or back to Renee's point about faith, has more to do with our perception of God, our understanding of who God is, and whether that is not understanding his power, or not understanding his love and care, or not understanding his grace, or not whatever. I think it might be different for each one.
For example, for Ephesians 3, that Christ's love for us is beyond what we can understand.
Yeah, that Ephesians 3, Christ's love for us is beyond what we can understand. And I think there's something, I think, and this is, once again, take that for what it's worth, but at least specifically in our fellowship, okay? Traditionally, churches of Christ have been cessationist, and we talked about what that word means, the idea that works of the Spirit have ceased. There were some, and I'm not naming any names because I can't speak for every Church of Christ. That's one of the beautiful things about the Churches of Christ, is that we don't have a central hub. But some have taught that the Spirit stopped working with the apostles. Some have taught that the Spirit stopped working when the written word was presented. There have been a lot of different ways that cessationism has played itself out. And let me read you a quote from a guy named Charles Taylor. Charles Taylor, in his book, A Secular Age, let me read you this. Almost everyone can agree that one of the big differences between us and our ancestors of 500 years ago is that they lived in a, quote, enchanted world, and we do not. At the very least, we live in a much less, quote, enchanted world. We might think of this as our having lost a number of beliefs and the practices which they made possible, but more, the enchanted world was one in which these forces could cross a porous boundary and shape our lives, psychic and physical. One of the big differences between us and them is that we live with a much firmer sense of the boundary between self and other. We are, quote, buffered selves. We have changed. And Taylor's point is that way back when, and we'll go back to scriptural times, they lived in a much more enchanted world. And that world, that word he's using there is that the supernatural was alive and well, and that there were things happening that couldn't be explained. As we have moved into an Enlightenment and post-Enlightenment era, and on into postmodernism and whatnot, we've kind of let rational thought displace a lot of that. We understand scientifically how things happen much more than they did, and therefore we've lost some of that enchantment. Now, I think there's something to that, and I want to hear your take on that. But because how do you think our loss of enchantment as a culture, as a people, how do you think our loss of enchantment has affected our ability to be led by the Spirit, to walk with the Spirit, to be in step with the Spirit, all these things that we've studied in Scripture? Chris? Mm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm. Okay, I'm going to come to you, Kevin. Let me restate that for those who couldn't hear it. That with our understanding now of how the body works and the science and the things behind that, back then when someone would recover from something, it was a miracle because God had healed them. Now we tend to say, well, it was the natural process of this and this and this, or this medicine or that treatment or whatever. And whereas even though we understand how it happens more, that doesn't make it any less a work of God. Kevin? Mm-hmm. That science has now become our explanation for everything, and whereas uh, uh, in another time they may not have had that as much, we now say, well, this happens scientifically, very similar to what Chris is saying. You've heard me tell the story before about family members who were diagnosed with cancer, and it was all over the body, and it was very dire diagnoses, and their church, multiple churches, began praying for them in earnest, and the next week they went to MD Anderson and found that it was much less than they had originally thought. And the reaction was, oh, well, the scanners in our little hometown must not be as good as theirs. And it's like, are you really stealing some glory from God and putting it on scanners? Because you were prayed for in earnest. And I think sometimes we're reluctant to say that. And so we're giving glory to mechanical malfunction rather than the power of prayer in our lives. And I don't know, maybe there's something to that. Yes, sir. Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm. That's a good point. Both our experience and Hollywood has ridiculed that faith in such a way that we're a little bit reluctant to be and I think our experience of not just faith healers, but I've told you about the times when people told me they had a prophecy or something and it was ridiculous, and I knew it was ridiculous, and I'm like, well, I don't know what spirit you're talking to, but it ain't God, because God don't lie, and that's not true. But there's I think there's something to that. But I think you're right, and not just. I think we all could relate some kind of anecdotal story where we've seen or heard about something that was beyond explanation. You talk to people, I'm not going to put Larry on the spot, but you talk to people in the medical profession who've been there for a long time, they at least have one or two that something happened. And I can't explain it. I don't know how it happened, but it happened. And I think that's true in not just in the medical profession, but in those who are first responders. I think a lot of them will tell you stories about things that they've seen happen that defy explanation. And so somewhere in the 20th century, there was, especially again now within churches of Christ, we started being open a little bit more to the idea that maybe there's something more to this. And I'll give you an example. And I'm not speaking for everybody. This is anecdotal, personal experience, so take it for what it's worth. But I remember when churches had haunted houses in them. Do you remember that? Anybody? Nobody? Anybody remember that? Thank you. I'm not crazy. And it was a part of the thing. Now, not the scared straight kind of things that was big in the 90s, but as a kid, churches would have haunted houses in them because they didn't believe in the supernatural as being a thing, and so therefore it wasn't a big deal. And that's been gone for a long time, right? Because at some point we went, there's something to this spirit world. There's something to this supernatural. There's something happening more than what we can see. I don't know. And I think that's a bad example.
Well, I certainly don't mess around with preaching.
Absolutely. But so let me just put it out here to you. Specifically as churches of Christ, do you think churches of Christ have become more enchanted, less enchanted, or stayed about the same over the years? What do you think? This is an opinion question, and so you can't be wrong. This is just based on your experience, anecdotal understanding. What do you think? Anybody? Nobody's going to go there? Dick. Okay. The fact that we're talking about it is something. Okay. Years ago, we didn't talk about those things. Anybody else? Right. But that's, yeah, there's, and every place is different, and we know that. So I realize we are way overgeneralizing, and that's not a healthy thing to do. So maybe we just need to move on. Yeah, go ahead, G.
I just want to make an observation about what this conversation reveals about us. We were talking about the Spirit and what the Spirit does today and how we perceive all that. But most of our conversation has talked about prayer and healing and what we
No, that the Spirit does have a bigger role than we have, and I think we all believe that on some level, even regardless of what you believe about how the Spirit works or what the Spirit's work looks like. I think we do all have the fact that we continue to pray, we believe that something's going to happen, right? I mean, we believe that at least God is going to hear us, which in itself is a supernatural act. You're praying to an unseen being. There's something supernatural in your mind happening there. It's not normal. You know what I mean? You're not writing a letter to Santa Claus. This is something that you, right? And so I get that. This is not just limited to Churches of Christ. I was talking about Churches of Christ because for most of us that's our experience, and I realize not everybody in this room that's your heritage. However, that's kind of where we are, and so that's what I was going with. If you look at our Bibles, remember when we talked about the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, anybody remember the word for spirit? Do you remember? Ruach. And Ruach is used over 400 times. That's as many as occurs in the New Testament. The New Testament's like 389. And it gets translated in so many different ways. It gets translated as wind, it gets translated as breath, it gets translated as spirit. And it's hard because of that translation to go back and look through and find the Spirit working the same way as it was working in the New Testament. Yet it is. It's there. And it didn't just start with Acts 2. It was always there. It's just, and I'm not faulting our translators. Our translators are trying to be as diligent as possible to not put their own understanding in there and to translate the word as literally as possible. And so because of that, a lot of times things like Exodus 28. Exodus 28, there's the story of the craftsmen and women who are building the tabernacle. And if you read it in English, you won't find the word spirit in Exodus 28. They translate it as skill, but literally in Hebrew, it is a combination that means spirit of wisdom. But because of their focus on being as literal as possible, they kept it. And I respect that because I don't want them adding their own stuff into my Bible. I don't want their opinion going into my Bible. I want my Bible to be my Bible, and you know, I don't need anybody. I don't need them adding to it. And so I respect that. The problem is it does make it hard to find. For example, the New Revised Standard Version, they don't translate the Ruach Elohim in Genesis 1 as Spirit of God. They translate it as wind of God or wind from God. And so if you just are doing a search for Spirit in the Old Testament, you're not going to find that there, but it's there. And we've kind of gone through and looked at that. And so my point is, this is not just Churches of Christ. This is not just us. This is throughout Christianity that we struggle with this idea that the supernatural is at work because of our more rational minds. But I think when we get an understanding of the Spirit, that's what we've been trying to do over the course of these months, and we see how the Spirit works both in the Hebrew Bible and in the New Testament, and we hear the admonitions of Jesus, and we hear the admonitions of Paul, and we hear all these things, it changes how I view the world. It changes how I interact with the world. It changes how I interact with other people. And I think that's important. And maybe that needs to be. We're out of time, and so I don't want to run too far. But our understanding of the Spirit, and obviously we don't totally understand the Spirit because it's a different plane, and I don't think it's possible for me to fully understand the Spirit. Just like I don't think it's possible for me to fully understand God. That's why when Job says, I want you to come down here and meet me in court, God's like, well, when you can hang a moon, then you get to ask questions. That's the Jeff paraphrase version, but you know what I'm talking about. But how does our understanding of the Spirit impact our view of the world, our view of the church, our view of one another? I think that's a good question. And maybe that's a good one to ponder this week because we're out of time. But maybe that's where we'll pick up next week. How does our understanding of the Spirit impact the way we view the church, the way we view one another, the way we view the world, the way we view whatever? And so that's your homework. Let that marinate for this week, and that's where we'll pick up next Sunday. It is time for us to wrap up. Thank you for your discussion. We're going to take about 15 minutes and fellowship, and then we'll be back in here at 10 o'clock for worship.